The committee will come to order. Today we are meeting to consider H.R. 4842, the Homeland Security Science and Technology Authorization Act of 2010. I now recognize myself to make an opening statement. From screening technologies to first responder equipment, S&T is at the forefront of efforts to develop novel approaches and technologies to respond to some of the most vexing homeland security challenges. H.R. 4842, which is a product of over 9 months of bipartisan work, represents a milestone for the S&T Directorate and this committee. It is the first authorization bill for S&T since the department was created in 2002. Chairwoman Clark and Ranking Member Lundgren are to be commended for producing this fine piece of legislation. Through years of oversight work, this committee has a great appreciation for not only S&T's strengths and successes, but also its weaknesses. The main weaknesses, according to many observers, have been a lack of accountability and transparency and responsiveness. I'm pleased that Dr. Tara O'Toole has indicated a willingness to address these weaknesses that have impeded S&T from realizing its full potential. For our part with this bill, we will put S&T on a path to fulfilling its potential by not only providing roughly $2.27 billion in resources over the next 2 years, but also requiring a strategic plan, management reforms, and streamlined processes to drive its research activities in a manner that is responsive to its customers, TSA, CBP, Coast Guard, and other DHS components, as well as first responders. I cannot tell you how many times I've been approached by a company with a novel homeland security technology that has been frustrated by how difficult it is to work with S&T. We have to make it easier for innovative firms, especially the small businesses, to do business with S&T. This bill does just that by authorizing an Office of Public-Private Partnership to do outreach to business communities about opportunities to work with S&T. Further, within that office, the bill creates a new rapid review division to evaluate and provide feedback to unsolicited scientific proposals within 60 days of submission. Those proposals that are deemed promising by the office are then forwarded to either S&T research arm or a DHS component for further consideration. Creation of this office will address quite possibly the single biggest criticism of S&T by making it accessible, transparent, and responsive. H.R. 4842 also addresses the single biggest obstacle to Homeland Security technology innovation, access to capital. Specifically, it requires the Secretary to review DoD's venture capital programs and develop a model for DHS. To make S&T more accountable, H.R. 4842 requires S&T to make risk-based decisions about allocating its research funding. Additionally, it authorizes important programs within S&T and its sister component, the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, DNDO, including a requirement that the process for identified, prioritized, and funded research and development be institutionalized. New training for all DHS personnel that are involved in writing technology requirements, a doubling of DHS cyber security R&D budget, and affirmation of support for university programs, including minority-serving institutions. As always, I repeat, I'm thankful for the hard work of Chairwoman Clark and Ranking Member Lundgren. I also thank the Ranking Member, Mr. King, for joining me in co-sponsoring this legislation. In addition, it was proof that as we look at Homeland Security, it has very little significance with party. It's about protecting the homeland. I thank you for being here today to consider this important legislation. I now recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. King, to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as you've stated, H.R. 4842 is the product of extensive bipartisan work. It goes back to last summer. We've also gotten significant input from the Department of Homeland Security and also the House Committee on Science and Technology. But I want to emphasize and thank you and your staff for the tremendous cooperation that did exist. I know Ranking Member Lundgren has assured me time and again about the tremendous cooperation he received from the staff, and also from my good friends from New York, Yvette Clark. This is clearly and definitely a bipartisan product, and as you said, it does, I believe, send a signal stronger than ever that Homeland Security is a nonpartisan issue. It's something that should unite all Americans, no matter what their political affiliation. So I thank you and your staff, and obviously Chairwoman Clark for her efforts, and of course Ranking Member Lundgren for the interest and intensity he always brings to these issues. We specifically appreciate the majority working with us on provisions that are very important to Republican members, including the establishment of research initiatives to bolster border and maritime security, the development of tools to enhance resilience to terrorist attacks and other incidents, especially in rural communities, and an assessment of how useful rapid screening tools for influenza and other biological threats would be at the border ports of entry. Also on an issue which has a direct impact as far as New York is concerned, but as Ranking Member Lundgren knows, also applies nationwide, and that's the issue of securing the cities. And Chairwoman Clark has been exceptionally active on this issue. This is basically to protect municipalities against dirty bomb attacks coming from outlying areas in the suburbs. It's been started in New York. It's a pilot program in New York. It's gone beyond that, but it's really important that this continue. And I think the fact that there's such a large bipartisan expression of support for it in this bill and this committee is very significant, because the administration now 2 years in a row has zeroed this out in its budget. And last year, Chairwoman Clark and I were able to get an amendment passed through on the House floor, and I remember Dan Lundgren spoke very effectively for it, because, again, it is a nationwide program. And we got $20 million put into last year's budget. However, again, it's been zeroed again this year. We did get a authorization passed on suspension, actually back on January 20 of this year, calling for a continued $20 million expenditure, but we're going to have this fight again as the appropriations bill comes up. So I think it's so significant that we have this strong vote here today, and that it is bipartisan, and it comes from all sections of the country, because, again, while the program was begun in New York, it's a nationwide impact, and as the President has emphasized time and again this week at the Nuclear Summit, the great threat we face from nuclear materials, to me, it makes no sense at all to be eliminating the type of radiation detectors that are necessary to protect cities and municipalities from a dirty bomb attack, which will be coming from the suburbs into the cities. So I want to thank the committee for that. And there will be a number of amendments offered today on priorities that are very important to Republican members. So I would ask colleagues on my side of the aisle to certainly join with the committee in adopting all these important amendments. I urge adoption of the entire package here. This is a really well thought out, comprehensive piece of legislation, and I will urge its adoption. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. I now recognize the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology, and lead sponsor of the measure, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Clark, to make an opening statement.
Thank you for marking up this bill today, Mr. Chairman. I know that your ANS makes very thoughtful revisions to a very good bill. I want to express my appreciation and thanks to Ranking Member, to you, Mr. Chairman, to Ranking Member King, to ETCS&T Ranking Member Lundgren, as well as Mr. Preskrell, Mr. Green, and Ms. Richardson for co-sponsoring this bill. We often say that Homeland Security is not a partisan issue, and Mr. King, Mr. Lundgren, and the minority staff have worked closely with us to create this outstanding product that we're all proud of. For nearly a year, we worked to craft this bipartisan science and technology authorization bill. The bill acknowledges the importance of science and technology research, development, testing, and evaluation in ensuring the security and safety of the American people and our nation. Our purpose in crafting this bill is to ensure that the Science and Technology Directorate has the right tools available to be successful. Success in this context means delivering products into the hands of our first responders, law enforcement officials, and critical infrastructure owners to help them achieve their mission and make America more secure. In conducting our review, we examined the Homeland Security Act and the Department's use of the authorities the Congress has vested in it. We have also received insight and information from DHS leadership, stakeholders, and the R&D community, business leaders, and independent analysts. This legislation authorizes important management functions and programs within S&T. Within this legislation, we institutionalize the process by which research and development is identified, prioritized, and funded within DHS, establish training programs for developing technology requirements at DHS, authorize an Office of Testing and Evaluation designed to prevent problems that occurred in major acquisition programs like SBI Net and ASP, create an Office of Public-Private Partnerships, and establish within S&T a streamlined review process for unsolicited proposals, emphasize the importance of strategic planning, and require S&T to do so every 2 years. Authorize twice the current amount of funding for cybersecurity R&D, affirm the committee's support for university programs, and explore alternatives for ASP technologies. I hope that you will support this legislation, and I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology, and original co-sponsor of this measure, gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren, to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to join you, the ranking member, Mr. King, and Chairwoman Clark, in bringing this before the full committee. This is, as was stated before, the first authorization for S&T since the act basically setting up the Department of Homeland Security. And it is our responsibility to oversee, but more than to oversee, to actually establish the parameters by which the Department of Homeland Security operates. And in this very important area of science and technology, we are carrying forward that responsibility. We do depend on this S&T Directorate to develop state-of-the-art technology and the systems that enable us to protect our citizens and critical infrastructure from terrorist attack. It's obvious that the better technology that we develop and deploy, the stronger our homeland defenses will be against Islamic jihadist enemies. Timely and accurate intelligence, must be underscored, is always our best defense against terror threat. However, when we have no actionable intelligence, or where that intelligence is spotty at best, we must rely on the skill of our personnel and the effectiveness of our technology to allow us to detect, to deter, and defend against the terrorist enemy. As has been said before, when it comes to Homeland Security, there should be no room for partisanship. And I do believe, it's almost sounding like a cliche, but I do believe that the spirit of cooperation that is evidenced by this product is one that would serve the Congress well in other pursuits. I want to thank the chairwoman for her bipartisan leadership. Her staff has been exceptional in their outreach to our staff. We have, I think, accomplished a good product. Additionally, there are, I believe, 16 in number amendments to be considered by this committee. We have reviewed them from this side, and both the Republican and the Democratic amendments are worthy of support, and I hope we'll gain the support of all on this committee. Once again, I want to thank the chairman, Mr. Thompson, for helping us bring this bill to this committee at this time, and commend to my colleagues this bill and the amendments that will be considered in the in block, I guess, and say that this is a very, very good legislative product as the result of bipartisanship. I would also indicate that we have sought the response from the administration on this. They've had time to review it. A number of the changes contained in the amendment and in the chairman's amendment in the nature of a substitute, embody recommendations made by the administration. So this is a collaborative effort of the members of this committee and the administration, and I thank everybody involved, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind the committee that other members may submit opening statements for the record. I now call up H.R. 4842. The bill was circulated in advance and printed copies are available. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Per my agreement with Ranking Member King, the committee will use a roster for amendments during consideration of the measure.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from New York.
reserving the right to object, and I won't object, I would ask the chair to explain our agreement regarding the amendments.
Thank you very much. We'll be happy to. The committee will take up amendments in the order listed on the amendment roster. If a member is not present to offer an amendment that is listed on the roster, the chair will allow the member to offer the amendment when the member returns, to the extent practicable and not prohibited by House or committee rules. Finally, amendments that are not on the roster may be considered after there has been an opportunity for amendments on the roster to be offered, to the extent practicable and not prohibited by House or committee rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I withdraw my reservation.
Thank you very much. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Section 1, short title.
I have and offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, which was circulated in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4842, offered by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following.
I'd like to waive the reading of the A&S, and without objection, the reading is dispensed with, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is considered as original text for the purpose of amending. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I now recognize myself to explain the A&S for 5 minutes. As many of you know, we had originally intended to hold this markup a few weeks ago, but delayed consideration to provide adequate time for the department to give feedback on the bill. I want to take the opportunity to thank S&T Undersecretary Tara O'Toole, DNDO Director Bill Hagan, and their teams for both their thoughtful contributions to the bill. My amendment in the nature of a substitute takes into account the outstanding feedback we got from DHS. In fact, my amendment completely rewrites Section 202, which deals with how S&T is to conduct testing and evaluation, was completely rewritten as proposed by the department. DHS's feedback has made this a better product, and we appreciate their work. The other major difference between my amendment and the legislation that was forwarded from the Emerging Threats Subcommittee is the addition of a new title, creating a new national commission. The purpose of the Commission on the Protection of Critical Electric and Electronic Infrastructures is to assess vulnerabilities of this infrastructure and provide a clear and comprehensive strategy and specific recommendations for securing this infrastructure. For some time, I've had an interest in establishing this commission as a method of addressing the physical and cyber vulnerabilities on the electric grid that have been identified through our oversight work. With that, I urge all members to support my amendment. After consultation with the ranking member, there's a bipartisan agreement to adopt all of the amendments listed on the roster following the amendment in the nature of a substitute by unanimous consent, as perfected and modified where appropriate. Without objection, all of the amendments listed on the roster following the amendment in the nature of a substitute are adopted. The McCall Amendment, addressing the authorization of a cybersecurity preparedness consortium, is adopted as amendment by perfecting amendment to that amendment placed as a clerk's desk on behalf of Ms. Jackson Lee. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Are there any further amendments? Hearing no further amendments, the question on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amendment. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended is agreed to. The question now occurs on adoption of H.R. 4842 as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the adoption of the bill as amended is agreed to. A quorum being present, the question now occurs on ordering reported H.R. 4842 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported to the House with a favorable recommendation.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Chairman, on this I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Is there a sufficient second for a recorded vote? A sufficient number having agreed, a recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Sanchez. Ms. Harmon. Mr. DeFazio. Ms. Norton. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Carney. Mr. Carney votes aye. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Richardson. Ms. Richardson votes aye. Mrs. Kirkpatrick. Mrs. Kirkpatrick votes aye. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan votes aye. Mr. Owens. Mr. Owens votes aye. Mr. Pascrell. Mr. Pascrell votes aye. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Cleaver votes aye. Mr. Green. Mr. Green votes yea. Mr. Himes. Mr. Himes votes aye. Ms. Kilroy. Ms. Kilroy votes aye. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes aye. Mr. King. Mr. King votes aye. Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith votes aye. Mr. Souter. Mr. Souter votes aye. Mr. Lundgren. Mr. Lundgren votes aye. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers votes aye. Mr. McCall. Mr. McCall votes aye. Mr. Dent. Mr. Dent votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Mr. Brown. Mrs. Miller. Mr. Olson. Mr. Olson votes aye. Mr. Gao. Mr. Gao votes yes. Mr. Austria. Mr. Austria votes aye. Ms. Sanchez. Ms. Harmon. Mr. DeFazio. Ms. Norton. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Cuellar votes aye. Mr. Brown. Mrs. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, how am I recorded?
Clerk will report Ms. Sanchez's vote.
Ms. Sanchez is not recorded.
Aye, please.
Ms. Sanchez votes aye.
How am I recorded?
The chairman is not recorded.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Thompson votes aye.
Clerk will report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there are 26 yeas and 0 noes.
The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported to the House with a favorable recommendation. Without objection, staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes.
Pursuant, Mr. Chairman?
Gentlelady from New York.
Yes, pursuant to Rule 22, Clause 1 I move that the committee authorize the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the bill just ordered reported by this committee or on a similar Senate bill.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentleman from New York.
pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask the members of 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views.
So ordered. There being no further business, gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souder.
In the interest of time, we didn't do statements, and I assume they'll be inserted in the record. And I really appreciate the chairman and the subcommittee chairman and the border committee's great willingness to work, but I hope we can still try to work through. I agreed to language change to may rather than shall on border control, and I hope we can continue to talk about that.
I think, given the spirit of bipartisanship, we can probably work it out. There being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.